We're live, I think. Okay. Hey, everyone. Just going to give it a minute for people to log in. I wish this thing would pre-populate, or if I could figure out how to do that, but for now, we'll just give it a second. And just because you're looking at the screen, I just want to note that Tim is there. We had some technical difficulties getting his screen up and running, so rather than mess with it, he's going to do this. He's going to be a screen until the end and then turn it off just so it works.
Yeah, I'm going to be a disembodied head for a little while, but don't worry. You guys can look at my face at the end.
He's real, I promise. I saw him.
And because unfortunately I just have the one screen and I can't see the chat window, I won't be able to answer questions in line. But don't worry, we'll go pretty fast, and there'll be plenty of time at the end. I'll hang out to answer any questions anybody might have.
Cool. So I know it sent some push notifications to people. I'm just going to go into the chat, into the Slack, and also remind people. There's got to be a better way to pre-populate this. Like, Facebook does the same thing. You can't, it doesn't start populating it until you hit the live button, which means you're just talking to yourself for the first couple minutes. But if you are here, say hi in the chat. That way we know. I think I see at least a couple people here. If you can't chat, make sure you're logged into your Google account, and that'll let you chat. You don't need to start a channel or anything. Just make sure you have a Google account, and that'll let you do it. So I'll type hi. All right, why don't we just kick this thing off, and people will roll in as they do. I know some people on the West Coast are still working, but we East Coast folks, we're going to enjoy our evening starting now. So hi, everyone. If you're joining for the first time, I am Jen Vargas, and I run the Just Product community. It's Just Product Jobs and JustProduct.co. And every month we do a live stream bringing in a member of our community who's going to talk about something they know and something in the product field and share their knowledge, and hopefully you'll learn something and maybe want to do a talk in the future. Today we have Tim, oh crap, he just told me Frietas. Tim Frietas.
It's Frietas. Yeah.
It's not how you would phonetically pronounce it in either option, but it's Frietas, Tim Frietas, who has quite the resume. He worked at DigitalOcean, CreateSpace, Amazon, Giphy, and now you're at Stay, I believe, which is working on the future of cities, which is really cool. And so he's going to be talking to us about building a better roadmap for your team. So he's going to do his talk, which we promise he's there. His head will appear at the end. We just want to make sure the screen works for this and that you can see the presentation. And at the end of his talk, he'll come in and do Q&A. And so if you have any questions, either during the talk or after, just throw them in the chat and we'll answer them at the end. And because he can't see the chat, he won't be answering during it. So don't worry, we will get to your questions just at the end. And without further ado, let's just have you take it away, Tim.
All right. Thanks, Jen. So Jen, yeah, stole a little bit of my thunder as far as explaining my background goes. But I think the takeaway there is I've worked at to being absorbed in Amazon and working for a 150,000 person monolith. They're like twice that now, since in the 3 short years that I haven't worked there anymore. And then I was the first outside product hire at DigitalOcean, and helped them put together the roadmap for all the things that are launching now. And then I spent the last year at Giphy, where I was platform PM and redid their API. And I left that to join Stay, which is smart city tech. Just think of it as the database for the cities of the future, and you're in the right ballpark. So something like Segment.io or something like that, or I guess it's just segment.com now. But think of something like a really easy to put all of city data in one place so the cities can actually make real-time insights. And you got an idea of what I'm working on now. So I've worked, my current team is 5 people in the entire company, but I've had as many as like 300 stakeholders at a time. But curiously, the process that I've used over the years has actually just become more and more standardized instead of less. There's some exceptions, but I'm going to walk through sort of the framework that I use now. So, you'll have these sorts of problems no matter how big your company is. You'll have competing priorities and difficult stakeholders and, things like that. And if those sound common, I'm sure they do, because every PM experiences them. So I have a framework for this, which is what I'm sharing with you today. And this is just one possible framework that's evolved over the years that works for me. There's a couple similar frameworks out there that from or kind of are eerily close to what I was already doing. One I drew inspiration from was Pandora's approach to think in 90-day cycles. Once I can actually type in a Slack window, I'll actually link all these resources so you don't have to remember all this stuff. But they focus on the next 90 days, which I found really valuable in separating the wheat from the chaff. And then a recent thing that came out about a month ago was the brand design sprint process by Google Ventures, which is actually really close to what you're going to see today. Basically, going through some ideas, discussing voting, reconvening, and working on consensus that way. There's no one true path to this sort of stuff. Your mileage may vary. Be as methodical as I am about this, but I've found this to have value for me and sort of getting, it's a good blend of the qualitative and the quantitative in my view. And if you don't use any of this, that's fine. That's what this is all about, is just sort of for each of us. And I found that this has worked for me at a lot of different scales. Let's see, sorry, my keynote thing lost my little notes, so I'll extemporize while it's happening. So it's really, I sort of paint this as 1 2-hour meeting. Sometimes I'll call it a half-day meeting, but really you can get this done in a couple hours, where I, say, hey, any stakeholders that are really important to this planning process, let's come together and let's decide what we're doing for the 90 days, next 90 days. This is the place where those decisions get made. Sort of going through the list here, number one is just gathering the right people. Ideally you have a representative from each functional team that has a serious stake in the roadmap. We know they need to be there because they're impacted by this work heavily. In a normal SaaS company, just to use an example, it's probably most familiar to most of you, that probably looks like, somebody from each product team, if you have multiple product teams, a representative, if not the lead, from each engineering team, someone from marketing, someone from customer experience or success or whatever, your brand of customer support is called nowadays. But, your group may look different. What your group looks like. I can guarantee you without, you're thinking that, oh, well, I don't have some of those people, but I have other people who are important. What your group looks like, So the idea is just to make sure that the right people are in the room, are heard, and they have a chance to express patience. I really try to explain what we're doing, that, we're offering everybody a seat at the table to be a voting party in really setting the stage for what the company does over the next quarter, and really empower people. That leads into getting people excited, which is, sort of a cousin of setting expectations, but setting expectations also means, saying this is a serious meeting, prepare for it. Know what your team wants to do and why, what you think is most important in the next quarter. Leave your cell phone and your laptop at your desk. Someone will be here to take notes. This is a discussion where you're going to be engaged. The sooner that you set those expectations, the better. I also like to set the expectation that this meeting will move really fast. I find putting, a time constraint and, having people really think about they need to make quick decisions really helps take a lot of the hot air out of the room when it comes to someone spending 30 minutes trying to extemporize their point. Set the expectations you're going to make decisions quickly, and these are going to be lasting decisions. And then, so all of this, I guess, I could say that they do this whole preparation section generally gets kicked off a couple weeks before the actual meeting with stakeholders. So saying, hey, it's that time of year again, we're going to do quarterly planning. If we've done this before and I've worked with, people doing this and they know, if not, I'll outline like how this really works. That people should come with a stack ranked list of, stories that are important to their team appropriately. And I won't get into the dark art of sizing in this talk. It's a whole other talk in itself. I have yet another magical spreadsheet, and you'll see a spreadsheet in this presentation that I use for sizing stuff. If you want to know more about how my method works, I'm happy to answer questions, of course, but I highly recommend the book, How to Measure Anything by Douglas Hubbard. Again, I will link this in the Just Product Chat. But very good, no nonsense, like way to statistics to uncertainty. And that will go a long way towards, sort of calibrating, people who most people are not very good at estimating things, and getting them a little bit more in the ballpark. Also, just make a quick aside on tooling here. So however you manage your roadmap and your priorities and stuff is up to you. You'll see that I'm going to use a Google Sheet during this process. I usually actually do use a Google Sheet or Excel for which will become self-evident why in a minute, because I do some calculations in it. But the tooling that you use is up to you. I think the method holds true even if you're just using a Kanban board, or if you have some complex Jira workflow. It doesn't matter. As long as the stories are all in one place and you can stack rank them, that's the minimum tool set you need to apply this. You've spent 2 weeks, you've worked with stakeholders. You should have met with the main stakeholders who are supposed to bring deliverable, stack ranked, things to be prioritized over the quarter. Hopefully you've worked with them to make sure that everything is a 90-day task or less in their mind for their portion of the work. That's particularly important because we're only talking about, essentially a 90-day sprint here, for lack of a better analogy. The reason why is because if you'll read the Pandora article I will link out, is that anything after 90 days it's a lot more conjecture, and if something's big enough to be over 90 days, then it just hasn't been thought deeply enough about what the first step is. The first step of a year-long project is not more than 90 days, right? So be diplomatic and work with your stakeholders to make sure that the lists that they bring are granular enough to be valuable in this context. Just sort of quickly before I'll jump through each of these and explain these in detail. But for the meeting itself, like I said, I budget 2 hours. If it's a large enough group of stakeholders, sometimes I'll say it's a half-day thing. But I try to set the expectation that it's going to be a couple hours. We're going to move fast. Things that you really need are Post-its. Those are actually really important because there's going to be some blind voting in here. Or something to write things down, but it's very nice if you can stick them on the board and rearrange them in the groups, which we'll get to in a minute. And I just transcribe any remote stakeholders and just work with them over Slack or the tool of your choice to just gather their votes for the voting stage and that sort of thing, which we'll get to. And then the final thing that you sort of need to bring is yourself. You're going to actually play a really big part in the success of this. This is your chance to shine and inspire people as a PM. This is the part of your job that you don't get to do as much sometimes, which is you're the uniter here. You're the one who's going to help steer people in the right direction. If arguments occur, you're going to be the one to ask the right kinds of questions to keep people on the actual quantitative and not qualitative nature of what we're trying to do here. There's going to be a little bit of a blend there. It's okay for there to be some gut feel stuff, but if someone's going on a tangent and is not being helpful, this is, you need to, be sure to bring yourself in addition to everything else, or this is not going to work. But to step through, the way this works is we work together to choose what we think the top goals are for the company for the next 90 days. We'll discuss and vote on that. We'll then go through the master list of asks. And compare those to the goals that we've come up with as a group. We'll determine the effort, the relative effort of each of those tasks, including any sort of inter-team dependencies. Come up with a natural stack ranking, which will hopefully also become self-evident in a minute. And then finally, you want to discuss and vote that final stack ranking and get buy-in. A lot of this is just constructed to create a framework for simple, basic stack ranking, and then a deeper discussion about whether or not it's accurate, so that everybody has a voice in what happens. Start with top goals. So the way that this works is I first ask everyone. I live next to a motorcycle park, so that's. So I will first ask everyone in the room to take. I'll hand them a stack of 3 or 5 Post-its, and I'll just say, write down what you think the top goals are for the company over the next quarter. Now, depending on your company, you may be sufficiently advanced where your company already has very clear quarterly goals, which is great. You can probably just simply confirm that everybody's on the same page of what those are really fast and not have everyone vote. But depending on where I've been at, sometimes that's required some clarification. So I have everyone just sort of like blindly write down what they think the top 3 company goals are, and then take turns going up onto a whiteboard or a wall and just sticking them up, saying what they wrote and why they wrote it. When you do this with 6 or 7 or 8 people, if your group is that big, then it's usually actually pretty revealing, like what like the common themes are versus what are important to just a team or a single stakeholder. So we put all those up there, and then there's going to be duplicates, right? Like, more than one person's probably going to choose something. Let's just say revenue is like important to a group or a stakeholder. So I try to consolidate all of those. And then we discuss that those groups are the correct groups of Post-its, and then have people like knowing what's up there. So everybody else is like put up what's up there. We now have like 6 different groups of like what our top goals are. Have everyone go up and put 3 votes, for their 1, 2, and 3. And then you'll have nice segregated groups of different sorts of goals, and then you'll have a score on each of them for how important they really are. From there, there's usually like 3 clear winners, I've found. Every once in a while, you'll have a 4th one. Rarely, you'll have a 5th one. But now you should have between 2 and 5 like really important goals for your company. 90 days. These goals should be pretty specific and pretty quantitative. Like, someone might, and this is another place where you as the PM need to be aware of that and steer the conversation. So, someone might put up a sticker that says improved customer experience. When they do that and they talk about that, you should challenge them on what they really mean. Like, improved customer experience could mean, great customer support to just a speedier checkout experience to a lot of different things, right? I mean, use your imagination. You need to get a little bit more specific with that. So something like speed or latency is actually like a better general top goal than improved customer experience, which is kind of vague and could mean a lot of things. So try and be specific and quantitative. I've found every single ask, no matter what it is, if it's something like, ship things faster to customers, is, it can be distilled a little bit further than that down to a primitive. Those primitives are things like activation, retention, recurring usage, referral, reduced bounce rate, increased revenue, improved conversion, scaling or tech debt sort of things. Like, there's a few buckets where I found that almost everything can be distilled down into those. And those are my buckets. I try and look at what's up there and fit it into one of those if it isn't one. And the closer you can get it to a 1 to 3 word explanation of what your goal is, the more successful you'll be in a later stage of this. So hopefully at this point we've chosen the top few goals and we've got some consensus on what we think the goals are for the next 90 days of the business. Then finally, we have this big list, which is probably a few dozen items long of feature requests or priorities for the next 90 days. I construct one giant list and I try and stagger it between like what's really important for each team and just sort of go, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2 or whatever, and try and put the things that each team thought was important near the top. And you'll see in a second, I'm going to walk you through an example. I'll actually create a matrix where there's a big list of goals on the left-hand side, and then across the top, there's our 3 company goals, and then there's also a bucket for level of effort for how hard this is. And we're going to sort of create a calculation matrix to figure out which of these things are really important. But before we do that, we'll look at that big list of stuff, and we'll concentrate mostly on the top, but we'll try and rank what's there and compromise it, right? So you just want to get things to rough priority order, but make sure that no team member in the room is feeling slighted that their thing isn't in the top 10 or top 20. If there's something that they really think is important, you can sort of bump that to the top of the list. You can kind of weight the company goals if needed. I'll show you what I mean by that in a second, but you could decide simply like far and above more important than the other 2 goals that you come up with, and you can work that into your analysis at the end. And I'll show you how I would do that. You can take whatever path you want, but I sort of have a template that I can share with you myself. So now that we have all these things up here in kind of rough shuffled priority order based off of nothing but the gut feels of the stakeholders that you're dealing with there on the other side of the matrix, we can go, okay, like how hard is this stuff really? And I tend to think of that in some sort of t-shirt sizing, like small, medium, large, or something like that, where for me, small is like under a couple weeks, medium is like 2 to 6 weeks, and then large would be like 6 to 12 weeks. There's 12 weeks in a quarter, so something that's gonna take more than half the period in the quarter. Your buckets are kind of up to you. I find that those work pretty well. And then what we're going to do is we're going to give different scores to each of those in a minute. I also here use this as an opportunity to make sure that scoring is accurate by asking everyone any serious interdependencies between any of these products or projects that they see, because those should probably make those efforts a little bit more complex than people think. The more people you have in this network of building something, the harder it gets, right? You'll have halting problems. There's order of operations. Marketing's ready for you, but you're not done with something, or you're done with something, but the platform team isn't done with the API you need to integrate with. Those things will happen, and you should work those into the level of effort required for a given project. So, at this point, I just have everyone what's on the board, if they're comfortable with the effort that they've assigned to things and the rough priority order of things. And if there's no objections, move on. If there's an objection, talk about it, but set the expectation that the real thing to talk about is why. Why is there an objection? What's the real point? And set the expectation that it's a quick discussion, and that at some point, if the discussion goes on for too long, that the conversation needs to continue. So yeah, finally, it's just like at this point, you should actually, which I'll sort of step you through in a minute, you should actually have a stack rank priority list of your roadmap that everybody in theory should be pretty close to agreed on. You should have a list of items that everybody brought to the table. You should know how heavily they help meet the quarterly goals, and you should have a rough idea of how much effort they are for the company as a whole. Apply some scoring where they sort of self-stack rank themselves. And it's always very interesting when you get to this point and you see people look at stuff and it's maybe not in the order that they originally thought. There's usually an aha moment here. And if there's not, then that's okay. You're a well-oiled team. There's nothing to feel bad about. So I will go through this list and be like, this is it. We don't know where the line is and what we can accomplish yet, but all other things being equal, here's the list of the top 15 or 20 things that we went through the trouble of scoring because we probably can't get much farther than that with the resources we have. Does everybody feel really, good about this or not? And then there's engaging the silent people. So one has been too quiet up to this point. There's also another chance to see how this PM and go, hey, Sam, you haven't said very much throughout this process. What are you thinking? Is there anything you would change? So I like to pull in people who don't seem like they're totally bought in yet. They have some reservation that they haven't voiced and they won't unless you bring it out of them. If that merits discussion with the group, by all means, discuss. Most of this time will hopefully be spent with, but again, set the expectation that, this discussion leads to real decisions when we leave this room, ideally. Then finally, if you've gotten to that point, just sort of read the room really, really well a lot of times. I've also had it work not so well when there's somebody who just doesn't feel like they were represented well, or there's just enough uncertainty that was unearthed through this process where people realized there were much more team interdependencies than they thought before, and their world order is kind of turned upside down, and they're not sure if what is on the board is actually okay. So everybody's nodding and happy, and they get this. Awesome. You can close the meeting. You can say, great. I'll send out notes later. We'll work internally to figure out where we can draw the line. Very much for participating. If you read the room and there's a lot of uncertainty, I usually use that to go, okay, we've made a lot of good progress today. Let me work with each of you separately to see what your thoughts are after you have some time to think about it, and we'll meet again next week for just an hour to review where we left off and what we think we're going to change. Sometimes you have to just sort of go, okay, we're not going to walk out of here with consensus, and take what you've learned and take it offline, individual stakeholders. And then finally, I think that's mostly it. You just really also want to show respect when you close this meeting. Thank everybody, even if it didn't go the way that you hoped as a PM. Maybe some of the things that you thought would be higher aren't there. Really thank people for contributing, for engaging, for spending that time with you. There's that time to build bonds and help assert yourself as that glue that makes sure that everybody's heard and that things happen. If all of this sounds a little like I'm a therapist here, or you as a PM are a therapist, well, guess what? It's part of your job. So much of this exercise is just about getting people to talk about their feelings. The smartest of you out there in this process, you already know roughly what that list is going to look like when you walk out of that room. This isn't for you. This is for them. So make sure that you've showed them respect throughout this entire process, that you've kept them on track if they've gotten off track, and thank them profusely for the time that they've put into this. And I found that if you nail that, then people respect this process and they get really excited about it. And the next time they know what to expect and they come with the right sort of stuff. So I am going to be crazy, and I'm actually going to try and show you an example spreadsheet of like sort of a straw man of what I would do. So really quickly here, hopefully. Hey, here's my calculator. So I just sort of created this fake, spreadsheet for like a SaaS company. So I've jumped ahead to kind of in the middle of the slides that I was talking about, but in the beginning, you would just sort of have like this list of stuff here, which might have gone on farther than this. And then these would have been, but in talking with my team, my hypothetical team, we decided that scaling, speed, and revenue were the things that we wanted to focus on for the next 90 days. So we did that in the choose top goal section. And after discussion, those were the 3 buckets that we landed on. Then we compared all of these asks to these top goals and how much they impacted them. And there's actually like a sort of like, well, I'll show you now, there's like kind of an ugly nested if statement here to actually calculate these things. And I have it to where, you can have this little drop down, pick high, low, medium, or I don't know, where for these 3 things, scaling, speed, and revenue, high is a 5, medium is a 3, and low is 1. Just sort of a naive weighting system. And then for effort, it's the opposite, right? I mean, obviously, like it would actually be like a lower total factor in the score, because high score is good. So I sort of, went through this whole thing, and I can sort actually go on ahead and, sort this range to see what I've been priority order in. And it looks like in this case, like there's 3 things that are kind of like at the top of the heap. So for scaling, speed, and revenue, we said that allowing users to change their subscription tier is a manual process right now. And this is just killing both the dev and customer experience teams. So it would have a high impact on scaling the business. Maybe this is also a high impact on the speed of the business, because we're spending a whole lot of time on this from both the people, manpower on the customer experience side, but maybe a technical debt sort of thing on tech. And then we actually think that this will have a pretty significant amount of impact on revenue, because we're either getting churn from people leaving because they can't change their subscription tier by themselves, or they want to change to a higher tier, but it takes us 2 weeks to actually change them, and we're losing that sort of revenue. So in this case, like, there's a high impact on all this stuff, but it's actually really hard too. So we've decided that, it is, actually a whole lot of effort. Now, if we turn that effort down, later after discussion, we found that the effort was actually much lower than we thought, then this is a clear winner of 18. In this naive weighting model, the highest this can be is 5, 5, 5, 5. So there's 20 is like the high score here. Now, as I hinted before, you may have found that like scaling was the most important thing in the world. I have all that sort of over here in this separate sort of sheet where, this is scaling. I can rename that scaling now if I wanted to, but like a low is worth 1 and a medium is worth 3 and a high is worth 5. We might just decide that just straight up like scaling is the most important thing. So I'm just going to double all these values. Again, this is very naive, and you can use whatever, whatever you want for this. And I'm going to just sort of go on down the line here and just sort of update these values. But if I were to go back here to my priorities, and I were to go on ahead and sort range, Google Sheets is a little bit more annoying with this than Excel, but you might see that like some of my stuff could have changed because scaling is so much more important now. Things that had a high scaling score before, but were like, but didn't have as high things in other places, might be further up this list. We have this sort of like dynamic rescoring scoreboard here. After assuming that you've determined effort and that this is all accurate, then here you go. Here's your stack rank list of stuff that we probably should do in the next 90 days. I guarantee that this is probably not exactly what every stakeholder wants, and that's a good thing. It's between what is really important to engineering versus what's really important to customer success, what's really important to the CEO. That's probably for the best. But you'll also find that people will cross lines a lot too. And that someone who walked in there, like the engineering team who really wanted to focus on technical debt, might agree that, yes, given that, speed and revenue are so important, there's some projects that are very high in the speed and revenue department that are not as, high in the scaling department, which is more likely to be the engineering, sort of element, and that they agree. You want people to sort of have at least some aisle crossing and acceptance of this list. And now we're talking about the point where you kind of like read the room and go and see if someone's really unhappy and why. And then I like to close with just sort of asking two questions. One is there anything in this list at all that you think is just way too low, and why? So, there's a relief valve there for someone to be like, actually, now that I think about it, like retire legacy API is way too low. Like this is actually really affecting our scaling a lot. So we should probably raise the score, recalculate this. In this case, maybe it didn't really do anything. And in some cases, it's just a straight override. Like everyone agrees that there's something missing there, and you can just sort of, grab this thing and just say, okay, it lives here now. Another question that I like to ask is to make sure that everybody is cool with everything, but also to get them thinking about skeletons in the closet are as far as interdependencies or execution go, and to be mindful over the next 90 days is risk is on here, or alternatively, 90 days from now, if we don't accomplish the top things on this list, what is the reason why we failed? What was it that broke us? Which of these items was got out of hand, or what's not on this list that's going to keep us from executing? It's really valuable for everybody who's a decision maker in a group to think about that in context of the entire company and not just their own siloed list of asks for the roadmap. Also helps drive company consensus, makes everyone really aware of what the thing is to look out for the next 90 days. And invariably in a 90-day cycle, the thing that someone said that they were really afraid of comes up, and you can remind them, like when things are going sideways, we thought about this, so what's our mitigation plan? I've always found it to be a valuable question to get people thinking about the company holistically the right way, but also to sort of calibrate their expectations that none of this is perfect. This software, most software development environments are really agile. There's got to be those things. Those skeletons are going to make their way out of the closet and dance all over your house. And when they do, it's time to keep calm and realize that, you thought about this. And because you've thought about this, you might have some ideas about how to mitigate those sorts of things. So with that being said, I think that would be the end. So around, I'm happy to answer any sort of questions you may have, and you guys can also see my lovely face hopefully now, although it's gotten dark in here since let's see if I can turn on the lights remotely.
Alexa, living room on. Oh, there we go. Nice.
So I'll bring up the other chat window, which I've lost here, and Oh, looks like someone hasn't asked any questions in
No
this
question.
chat.
I have a list a mile long, but
right.
We'll see. If anyone has questions, definitely add them in the chat, or if you, oh, there you go. Ryan has one. Do you want to read through them, or I'll read them to you?
I am reading it, so and I'll read it to the group. So the roadmap calculator sounds like a lighter version of the weighted shortest job first and cost delay method. I haven't looked in that particular method, but like opportunity scoring is kind of in this ballpark. Nothing, I don't claim like any grand like originality to any of this. Like it's pretty straightforward kind of thing. It's really just a simple tool to get people to think about weighting things in terms of actual customer impact. If you know a more accurate or better way to sort of do that, by all means, do that to be the quote unquote simplest thing that works. But I will absolutely look into WSJF and check it out. You know, if there's something I can learn from that.
Weighted WSJF is a terrible acronym. Someone needs to rebrand that whole thing. But
yeah, weighted shortest job first.
Yeah, it's still Wujif. That's how you pronounce that.
Wujif. Fairly familiar with the method, but the acronym certainly sounds representative of what I've laid out there. So, and yeah, maybe, who knows, maybe by osmosis, that as happens with PMs, you picked up something, you know, or I picked up something, I mean, or you picked up something along the way that, you know, exists. And again, yeah, I will not win points for like coming up with some super original thing. I try and stick to the simplest thing that works. I found this to scale really well. You know, 3 to 200-ish like stakeholders. Like it's really easy to put together like a stack rank list and those stakeholders align and just be like, okay, everybody agrees these are the most important things. Here's the things that were weighted the most, given those buckets of importance and how hard or easy they were. Given that, like, these seem like the best opportunities.
Nice. Any other questions? I know there's a couple people lurking. I've got some messages in Slack that people are driving and listening to you like they would listen to an audiobook while they're driving. So if you're driving, please don't type anything. But we'll get their questions later. I have a list, and I've been making while you're going. So this spreadsheet happens during the meeting. So you start with the Post-its and move to the spreadsheet during the meeting.
To the spreadsheet during the meeting?
Yeah. Am I breaking up still?
A little bit. I caught some of it. I'm sorry.
Okay. Do you start with the spreadsheet? Start with the Post-its and move to the spreadsheet during the meeting?
Oh yes. Yeah. I just start. Yeah, absolutely. Start with the Post-its. I sort of come in and just be like, all right, you know, this is where, you know, you guys write down what you think the top few goals are for the company, and you're going to get up here and talk about why you chose what you did. And yeah, definitely, it's kind of a parallel thing. Like I like to have like the giant spreadsheet in the sky of all the asks from all the different teams. And I try and be fair and combine everybody's and, you know, work things that were on the top of each of their lists into the top of the spreadsheet. But, you know, you kind of have to round robin those sorts of things. But before we even open a spreadsheet, I just open it with voting on what are the most important things that we as a company should be focusing on the next quarter. And again, you know, some companies are really, really good about this. Like some companies have super strong OKRs around this stuff. They're like, oh yeah, we're going to increase revenue by 31% by, you know, September 1st, you know, 2017. And you don't have to have that discussion. You can just be like, okay, you know, our goals are to increase revenue, increase, you know, by 31%, increase conversion by 25%, and to reduce churn by 10% or something if you're a SaaS company, right? Some of those are like really well defined. Other companies, not so much. Like depending on like how well organized you are, sometimes people haven't really actually thought about this very deeply. But it's usually an eye opener to see like, where people are coming from, because different teams come from different places. And it's a great place to drive that consensus, where it's like one team member might be like, oh, I realize now there's really only caring about things inside of my own sphere or my own bubble. And that, something, reduced or better, like I'll just use the example of like, a better self-service help system or forum is actually like really, really important. And it was causing the customer experience team all this pain, and they spend 90% of their time answering questions that could be completely answered if there's just that resource to do that. And they sort of, they gain that empathy. So much of this is just about gaining the empathy of other teams and having stakeholders realize that what they thought was the most important thing might be something they should be flexible about.
And do you cut off the list at some point? Say, okay, there's 15 items on this list, but let's be realistic, we have 90 days.
I find it's usually hard to do that inside of the 2-hour meeting, and the reason why is because you usually uncover a dependency that people didn't really realize was there, and that can have implications on estimations. So you can try to do that if you're sufficiently confident and you have the right high functioning group in the room. You can try and say, okay, where's the line for this quarter? What I usually do when I leave the meeting, I usually phrase it as, okay, we know what our priorities would be in a natural order here. I'm gonna work with each of you, and needs to contribute to estimation, be it development teams or what have you, to figure out what resources you have and like how far we can get down this list. And I'll send out notes with a final line of where we're going to draw things, and maybe it's after item 12, maybe it's after item 8, maybe it's after item 24, but that it's usually a hard thing to wing that inside of the actual meeting itself and get it right. Usually enough extra information comes to light that I try and capture that a little bit. It also leaves you a little bit of room. This is being pretty prescriptive to where your stakeholders are telling you exactly what to build in what order. But there's a little bit of your job is to understand also when maybe if you did something just a little bit different in a slightly different order, and you have good reasons to explain that, and it makes sense to bump something up a couple slots and explain why you and the team came to that conclusion after talking more in depth about what the real level of that's involved and that sort of thing. So this should be painted as like a nice way to get started on the roadmap, but I also try and lead the conversation. The final roadmap is to come along with some notes, and I'll follow up with each of you before I publish that. It allows you a little bit of flexibility to talk about the new stuff that's come to light through the process. You could talk about it there, but then it's it ends up being like a one-day meeting, and sometimes you'd have to pull in like a lead developer who's not there to really give you an accurate estimate of what it really looks like to migrate the database now that they know that like 3 other teams depend on the data that's in there, right? Like that's a pretty deep conversation.
Yeah.
And this is really like more tactical. It's like, what are really like the items that are most impactful to customers in the next quarter. And that usually ends up being pretty close to the final list.
Cool. If there's any more questions, please add them in the chat. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep going down my list. But I know Ryan's still in there. If anyone else has questions, please feel free to ask. I just have 2 more. It's again just like the tactics of how you sort of arrange this. Like how far in advance do you do your 90-day planning? And then on the flip side of that, like is it sort of dependent on the team structure? Like I can imagine the 90 days, some teams aren't done with whatever they had planned for that previous 90 days. So they're rolling into maybe a new quarter, and how does that sort of how do you allocate resources now that this roadmap has been done? It's not like, okay, we made the list, now let's go do it. We still have to rearrange the people.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of has to be a part of the company DNA. Like, this definitely has to be something that people are bought into. starting the process, 2 to 3 to 4 weeks, depending on what kind of lead time you need, can set the expectation that, starting, July 1st or whenever the next quarter is, we're going to try and plan this way, and we're going to try and execute this way. It does take everybody's buy-in. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, I think that's one of the positives that can come out of this, is that people know what to expect. A counterexample is like one company I worked at, quarterly, well, it was at least like every 6 months roadmap planning. But the way that it worked is just like, you knew it was going to happen, but there's no official invite for it. It took all week. It shut the entire company down to like figure all this stuff out. There's no real structure around it. And then in the end, we didn't end up doing half of what we thought we were going to do, because we were thinking too far ahead and too large of increment of like what we thought we could get done in 6 months. And so every 6 months, the company was shut down for a week to like figure this stuff out. We're really pessimistic about it because nothing ever really got done, and it was a huge waste of their time. And they kind of knew it was coming, but it was never officially scheduled. So it was always this annoying surprise. So I think you can use this method to instead of cadence, and all those things actually pay really big dividends if you can get people bought in and do this 2 or 3 times in a row. People know that in the couple weeks leading up to the end of the quarter, that they need to really think deeply about what's important to the company in the next quarter in the short term, and that what we decide is what we're going to execute. That's part of the setting expectations part. Sometimes that involves more than you as a PM. This requires, and again, this is not a bad thing necessarily unless you have particularly difficult executives, but like some of this sometimes involves like getting buy-in from upper management, and managing upstream and saying, hey, could probably work better this way, let's give this a try. It might not, you might have some, depending on where you're at, like this could be easier or harder to do. I've usually found a way to get people to try this, and when they try this, they're usually pretty happy with it. But your mileage may vary depending on your company. Every company is a snowflake, so.
This is true. Cool. It looks like I'll probably take this as the last question from Serge. How much does this process change quarter to quarter? Do you see it staying roughly the same?
Yeah, I mean, I found it pretty repeatable. And I'm trying to think of a case where I haven't. But yeah, I mean, if anything, it becomes more and more homogenous because people know what to expect and they come prepared and they know it's kind of the right way to think about compromise. I've actually found it to be more successful like the second, third, fourth time, and if anything, like more homogenous. Like I just once people get it the first time, then it becomes easier and easier and easier to do it. I mean, I'm sure there's exceptions. Like if you work for maybe you have like powerful CEO who like wants to have more of a voice in this. You might have to, find a way to let them have their stage time without derailing like the process of making sure everybody gets heard. But your job is to kind of equalize voices. Like part of this framework and the advantage of it is to give voices to people who that kind of goes back to what I said earlier about if all this sounds like you're a therapist, you kind of are. Like so much of this is, about driving consensus is really just like letting people who are pissed off about feeling like their voice is never heard when you plan stuff be heard. Very well, like it could be like 80% of the time you actually end up not doing what they want to do anyway, but at least they understand why. Like they understand that, hey, we've got bigger fish to fry. So it's just giving everybody that stage to give their input. And sometimes those people are really right. Sometimes they're just grumpy ne'er-do-wells who might learn something. Sometimes they just don't. But you kind of have to give everybody a seat at the table and when you do, you'll get some more respect from those people who think that they just didn't even have a chance to vote. So I can't think of a situation where like changed super dramatically. It's like it's evolved over time, but I can't think of like change where like quarter over quarter I go, oh well, this part of the process really didn't work, so I don't want to do it anymore for this team. Like not really. Like it's, you know, like even the hard parts for teams, like they're important questions, right? It's like, what could go wrong? Is this stuff in the right order? Why not? Like these are pretty universal questions, and it's kind of hard for me to imagine that like not asking them is like gonna be a bigger benefit long term for the company. So I found, keeping this pretty simple and static has worked pretty well.
Nice. I think that's a good note to end on. So thank you
Great.
so much, Tim, for sharing your experience and telling. I know I learned a lot. I've been through so many versions of roadmap planning that they never feel the same, and it always feels like an uphill battle. So this actually, to me, almost feels like, if you were to think of like a more macro agile sprint, where you have your planning ahead, and it becomes just part of the process, and it's super simple and almost numbers driven. That you say, here's where everything fell. We good, cool. Maybe even do a retro at the end of the quarter, and go from there. So I think this is awesome. And you said you'll be sharing a lot of the references you mentioned in Slack.
Yeah, exactly. I will share a link to the couple of articles or writings out there that I think are like close to or have influenced this. I'll also link to that book, How to Measure Anything, if you're actually interested in like trying to master the art of like sizing development estimates or like effort estimates. And something I hope to do over the next few days is actually like postable Medium posts for those of you who are better readers and less less listeners. Me personally, like I tend to compose or understand stuff a little bit better when I'm reading it than in a PowerPoint presentation. So hopefully I can actually outline this in a form that people can read, and I'll post that in there too. But I'll post immediate links. I'll share out the spreadsheet that I built, this generic sort of spreadsheet, and then people can choose to use it or eject it from their memory. But at least I'll have something that they can look at and see how it's put together.
Well, I know I'll be borrowing it, so thank you for sharing it. And thanks so much again. I know we have some thanks already coming through the chat. This will be archived on the justproduct.co site, so people usually tend to watch it also after the fact. So we'll have more views and more questions maybe coming in through the Slack after this.
Sure.
And thanks so much everyone who joined and everyone who will be watching in the future. Next month, I believe it's on the 17th, we have Kristen Womack, who will be talking about product analytics. And so that'll be, I'm pretty sure it's 17th, 7 p.m. The link is already on the Just Product site, so justproduct.co. Same place you probably RSVP'd for this. And if you're interested in doing a talk for, I believe we have May's covered, June, July, August, get in touch with me, Jen at justproduct.co, or in the Slack. And I'd love to have more perspectives come in and join us for future months. So thanks so much for joining, and happy April.
Thanks, Jen.
Bye.
See you guys in the chat.